Little Britches, Father and I Were Ranchers by Ralph Moody. Chapter 3. Fight, Molly! Monday morning, Grace and I went to school, and the attendance went up a fifth. Bessie Autland came for us and drove us over to the little brick schoolhouse, a mile and a half from home. When Bessie took us in to Miss Wheeler, she said, "I tried to tell Molly just to let them come in overalls and frock, but not to get them all dressed up like they were going to Sunday school. But she wouldn't think of it. Doesn't Ralph look cute in his little duster brown suit? Buster Brown, that is. Molly made it herself." Bessie didn't really talk loud, but her voice was clear and rang in the little room. There were 10 pupils in the school. I was going to say children, but I couldn't because Rudolph Haas was nearly as tall as Father. He was in the 8th grade. They all watched us like chicken hawks, while Miss Wheeler had us read and do numbers for her. After we were done with the numbers, she decided Grace belonged in the 4th grade and I in the 3rd grade. Recess didn't go a bit good for me. Before we left home, Mother had taken us into the front room and said, "I am not going to have you children grow up to be rowdies and ruffians just because we live on a farm. Ralph, if you get into a fight in this new school, I shall give you a hard thrashing when you come home. The Bible says that if your enemy spites you on one cheek, you are to turn the other. I want you to follow that teaching absolutely. And Grace, I want you to promise me on your word of honor that you will tell me if he even raises a hand against any child at school." She must have heard about Freddie Sprague. He was in the 2nd grade, but he was bigger and fatter than I. He hadn't been out to recess a minute when Freddie put a stick on my shoulder and then knocked it off. "Want to fight?" he said. Grace was standing right behind me and hollered, "If you do, I'll tell Mother. I knew she would too, so I said, "No, my mother won't let me." I don't know why the Bible picked out cheeks, but that's right where Freddie hit me. I wanted to hit him back, but I didn't dare to. Mother would spank me pretty hard if I did something right after she told me not to. I just let his hand stay down. I just let my hand stay down and turned my face around. Freddie hit that side too, and he hit it hard. When I started to cry, somebody sang out, "Molly! Molly!" When all the boys and even some of the girls started yelling. Then all the boys and even some of the girls started yelling it. Grace came over and wiped my face with my handkerchief. "Don't cry," she said. "Mother will be proud of you." Then Miss Wheeler rang the bell for us to come in and said Freddie should be ashamed for hitting me. Every time she wasn't looking the rest of the morning, he kept making faces at me. Noon was worse than recess. Grace had bought a rubber ball to school with her. She knew how to play jackstones with it, but the other girls didn't. As soon as we got out at noon, she divided our lunch and went off with the other girls to hunt for the right size stones. Mother had baked us each a cup custard. I laid my 2 sandwiches and piece of cake on top of my cup and went to look for a place to eat it. When I was halfway out to the carriage shed, Freddie came running with another stick to put on my shoulder. I spilled my sandwiches and cake trying to get away, and he knocked the cup out of my hand, yelling, "Fight! Molly! Fight!" All the other boys laughed at me. Some of them yelled, "Hit the little sissy, Freddie! Make him fight!" I had to run away to the far corner of the yard. All the other youngsters either rode to school or drove in old buggies. There was an open shed where they backed the buggies in at one end and tied the horses at the other. Willie Aldebolt rode a funny-looking grayish-white donkey with big yellow splotches. After they had eaten their lunches, the other boys got the donkey out and started to ride him. They would hold him by the ears until some boy got on. Then they let him loose and tickle him with a switch. He would buck like 60 something sometimes. He would buck like 60. Yeah. Sometimes the boys stayed on and sometimes they fell off. I had come to the corner of the shed where I could watch. When Freddie saw me, he hollered, "Let's put Molly on him." And they did. I wasn't much afraid. I hadn't fallen off the cowboy's horse and thought I could cut the mustard. Anyway, I was willing to take the chance. Mother hadn't said I couldn't ride a donkey, and I wanted to show the boys I wasn't a sissy. My ride lasted about half of the donkey's first buck jump. He kicked his heels up, and I pitched off between his ears. I landed right on my face in the gravel. I skinned my nose and bit my tongue. I couldn't help crying a little, but I didn't make any noise. Mother nearly went frantic when we got home from school. My Buster Brown suit was pretty well messed up from the bloody nose I got when I fell off the donkey, and Freddie had given me a good working over after school. I guess it hadn't helped my looks very much. Grace was so busy telling Mother about my being a good boy and not fighting that until after I was all cleaned up, she forgot to give her note Miss Wheeler had sent. Mother's eyes got all full of tears when she was washing my face and putting court plaster on my nose. She told me that she was proud of me for being a little gentleman and that she would see to it that those ruffians didn't attack me again. Grace hadn't seen me try to ride the donkey, and I thought it would be best not to mention it to Mother. Father came in from digging post holes just after Grace had remembered about the note. Mother was madder than ever and read it aloud to him. The teacher said that Grace had adjusted herself very nicely with the other girls, and she was sure I would soon make my adjustments, but she would suggest that I wear overalls to school like the other boys. Mother tossed the note down on the table and slapped it with her hand. Her lips were pinched together, and she said, "The fact that I am going to bring my children up on a farm isn't going to prevent me from bringing them up to be ladies and gentlemen. Ralph wearing overalls to school? The very idea! I shall see that teacher the first thing in the morning." Father shut his eyes and scratched the back of his head. Then he said, "There might be some reason in what she says, Mamie. And you know, there've been some gentlemen in overalls." Mother's lips pinched tighter than ever, and she never said a word. Father and Mother sat up in the kitchen till after I went to sleep. I don't know what they talked about, but the part that was about me must have ended in a compromise. Mother didn't go to see the teacher, and I didn't wear overalls to school. My time at school wasn't happy. Freddie Sprague made it miserable, and I got so I was scared to death of the yellow-spotted donkey. Freddie thought it was a lot of fun to grab me by the back of my pants and jerk hard enough to pull off a couple of buttons. Then I'd have to hold them up and with one hand until I could get to Grace for a safety pinning. Mother always made them so I had to unbutton them when the other boys didn't have to, and some of the older ones were also yelling, "Come, Molly, let Mama unbutton you." Or they'd run me down and lug me for another nosedive off the donkey. One raw, wild afternoon when we were at recess, Willie Aldevote made an "I betcha" that he could not hold his breath longer than any of the rest of us. Nobody won because I turned blue and fell over about after half a minute. It didn't help a bit at school, but it really worked fine at home. That's weird. Though it wasn't nearly so cold in Colorado as it had been in New England, the high altitude bothered my heart a little, and I felt the cold more than the others. Once or twice I got so cold on the way home from school that I turned good and blue. When I did, Mother would doctor me with brandy and sugar. I tried for it often because I liked it, but she would only give it to me if I was really blue to the ears. I felt that if I stayed outside long enough to get good and cold, then held my breath for half a minute, just because I staggered through the kitchen door, it would get me a spoonful of brandy. Mother never guessed, but after I'd worked it half a dozen times, Father caught on, and I became what our old minister used to call a teetotaler. A teetotaler. Father tried to make up to me a little for the trouble I was having in school. He picked Saturdays to go to Denver for loads of lime and second-hand bricks to build a foundation under the house. I always went with him, and each time we had a picnic of custard pie and milk. Then, on the way home, he let me drive Bill and Nig. One evening after school, when Father and I were working on the foundation, Fred Altland drove into our yard. He and Father talked for a while about the house and building the foundation. Then Fred said, "Charlie, you seem to be pretty handy with the tools. You know, my father used to run a cattle all through this section when I was a kid. He kept 8 or 10 cow hands all the time, and sometimes there'd be as many as a couple of dozen. The old bunkhouse hasn't been used for about 10 years or more. I've been thinking about tearing it down, but all I can get out of it is firewood. I'll make a deal with you. If you want to buy me a ton of coal and haul it out from Denver, I'll take in a trade for the bunkhouse." It was fun moving the bunkhouse. We did it one Saturday. It was bigger than our whole house, and I couldn't see how in the world we could move it without tearing it all to pieces. But Fred and Father figured it out. Fred and his 2 hired men helped us, and it was easy as pie. Father shaped the ends of 4 double-length fence posts so they'd fit under the hubs of the wagon wheels. Then he bored holes through the ends of them and put axle grease on the shaped parts. As the men pried up one corner of the bunkhouse, I'd lay cribbing sticks underneath, the way Father showed me. We just kept going around and around it. They lifted a little, and I put in another stick or 2 till it was high enough to run the shaped ends of the post under it and into the hubs of the wheels. When the stay pins were driven, it made the whole bunkhouse into a great big 8-wheeled wagon. Of course, we couldn't turn any sharp corners, but we didn't need to. We just hitched on 4 horses and hauled it down across the prairie. At our house, we took it off the same way we had put it on. Father was fussy about making it land L-shaped to the back of our house, with the corners just touching. Although I was having a lot more fun at home, things were getting worse and worse at school. The Friday after we moved the bunkhouse, I got so bad I couldn't stand it It got so bad I couldn't stand it any longer. We had just finished eating our lunches that noon when Freddie Sprague started picking on me. He yanked at my pants so hard that all but one of the buttons flew off, and I had to use both hands to hold them up. Then he got dirty and yelled to the other kids, "Let's pull Molly's pants off so he won't have to squat like a girl."
What?
That's what it says. So he won't have to squat like a girl. They did, and right where all the girls could see too. I didn't care whether Mother would be ashamed of me or not. I couldn't be a gentleman with my pants off, and I didn't want to be one anyway. I plowed into Freddie with both fists. I had a big advantage because he didn't expect it. His nose started bleeding right before bleeding before mine did, and that made me sure I could lick him. He started to quit after a few minutes, but the older boys wouldn't let him out of the ring. I had been dreaming about that day for a month and kept hitting him as fast as I could. as fast as I could make my arm go. I heard the girls' voices around the ring, looking right up into Grace's face. She was jumping up and down and yelling, "Hit him! Hit him! Hit him hard!" I did my best, and Freddie put both arms over his face. Once, when the boys were pulling him back onto his feet, I glanced up toward the schoolhouse. Miss Wheeler was peeking out of the corner of the window. But she didn't ring the bell till it was over, and Grace had pinned my pants back on. Rudolph Haas lived way over south of the schoolhouse. Rudolph Haas. But that night he drove Grace and me clear to our house in his buggy. Just before we got in, Miss Wheeler came and said for Grace to tell Mother that she thought I had made my adjustment now. Now I get it. Maybe she thought so, but Mother didn't. She started to cry as soon as she saw me. My eye had turned kind of greenish black. She even cried while she was paddling me. It was good. It was a good hard spanking with one of Father's slippers, but I didn't mind it at all. It was worth 2 spankings to lick Freddie. I don't remember all the things she said to me, but they were plenty. Then she told Grace to call Father. He sent me for the milk as soon as he came into the house. The next day was Saturday, and I worked with Father all day. He was cutting the bunkhouse into 2, so we could move one of the pieces around and build it into a new kitchen. Along in the middle of the forenoon, I was holding a window sash when he took off the frame. He had his back to me, and we hadn't been talking at all. All at once he said, "I hear you had a fight yesterday." I had been expecting it. I didn't look up, and he didn't turn around. I said, "Yes, sir." "Did you lick him?" "Yes, sir." "Good." That was all. He never mentioned it again. The end of chapter 3.